All right, folks. Well, welcome to Meeting the Standard. This session is on techniques to address unmet CSBG organizational standards. My name's Lawrence Heiner. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Assistance here at CalCappa. We're your community action association. We'd really like to assist where we can when agencies have questions about how to comply with organizational standards or other community action or CSBG related um, requirements. So in this case, we're taking a peek at what some of the most missed standards are around the network. Maybe you'll find your agency in that set, maybe not, but we hope to offer some tips and tricks and some solutions for meeting those and other standards. We also have some general recommendations that can help meet any of the standards as you're plugging along through the course of the year or the couple of years, up to 5 years that we'll see are some of the time frames for organizational standards. So with me, I also have a couple of folks from our association. Eric Ellison's here with me as one of the our coordinator for training and technical assistance. And we may have our executive director, David Knight, drop in during the session as well to provide some insight. Okay, so today we're going to focus in on handful of items, not all of the standards. We could be here all day. We could do a wonderful training all day digging into how we can address all the standards, but we do want to focus our time on some of the ones that were hit most recently this year that we work with our friends at CSD and uncovered some of those. So we'll see what those look like for California. I have some general ideas on how to fill board vacancies. This seems to be a challenge across a lot of different agencies, so we'll discuss that. How to update a strategic plan, also with a little bit of the creation of that, but where we find some of the challenges in the org standards for meeting the strategic plan requirements. We'll take a look at fiscal and procurement policy review. That appeared on several field visits, so we want to ensure that everybody's got what they need to review those policies, and then some general tips for board meeting minutes and that sort of thing to make sure that all of your items are covered when CSD comes to do a monitoring, or when you have to self-assess your organizational standards. Right. Kick things off here. The national partnership has a lot of fantastic resources that are available. Most of them are sourced directly on this page. I've got a couple of links that I'll share with you today. And this one's also in the chat here. So it's an interesting way that Zoom did that one, but you've got a link in the chat here that's directly to the partnership site. What you'll find there initially, among other things, are the standards that are written out for public agencies, the standards that are written out for private agencies. They're mostly common with some subtle differences there. And then some variations on how those are displayed. We'll also see that there are loads of resources on that page for how to address these standards, but we'll dig into several, how we understand them here in California, and I'll share a couple of other resources from that site as we move along. The other thing that I'll note when we're thinking about organizational standards, and the reason why you see this person holding a letter grade of a C on their paper, when we think about organizational standards, we can think of them as meeting the bare minimum requirement for operating an agency. Okay, you may have heard of the standards of excellence. It's something that the National Partnership promotes. And there are a series of standards that go beyond the CSBG organizational standard to standards of excellence. And there are multiple tiers of excellence within that framework. What we'll see is if we are able to get 100% on organizational standards, if you think about it from letter grades, we've at least achieved a C. So if we see that we've gotten 100% on org standards, we've gotten our bare minimum. We've at minimum achieved our C letter grade. Now we may have done better than that. That's sort of up to the standards of excellence to decide. But here we can see that by not meeting our bare minimum, we're not achieving a C grade, right? So for those that remember schooling, we're in trouble. You know what I mean? If we're not meeting our organizational standards. So this was something that was illustrated to me in the past. I wanted to share this with you all so that we don't feel like, oh yeah, we got 100% on org standards. We must be an overachieving agency. No, we are meeting the minimum standards for operating an agency when we achieve organizational standards. So I didn't want it to be a downer, but do know that there are levels of achievement beyond the organizational standards. Does that make sense? Okay. Cool. So at last check, and this is I'll give you a little insight here as to how we pay attention to organizational standards. The whole state does a self-assessment of organizational standards every year. Those all come into CSD. CSD shares them with us so that we can help you all in areas that we start to see some trends, right? So in this case, what we're looking at and we're looking at the results of the self-assessments, what we noticed were that in private agencies, we had more than a few responses in these areas, or more than a few missing, or agencies missing these standards, right? So meeting frequencies and quorum requirements were not met by a lot of private agencies. We noticed that. We also noticed that there were performance appraisal and compensation requirements that hadn't been met yet. We have an idea of why that may be as we approach the end of the year, but those are things that have so far been unmet by several, 7 and 8 different agencies. And then fiscal policy review is another item. We'll hone in on that one for private agencies. For public agencies, we've got a fair amount around strategic planning that we'll talk about. And we recognize that there's more than that goes on with publics and requiring assistance with meeting some other standards. So we'll take a peek at some other things that we notice along the way as well. But I wanted to pause here because as we see these results come in now, we also recognize that we have another couple of months until the end of the calendar year. And a lot of this stuff tends to happen toward the end of the calendar year on its own. Okay, so when we look at things like the CEO performance appraisal or their compensation authorization, those things often are done toward the end of the calendar year, and we would expect that those would get achieved just as the regular flow of business happens, right? So another round of self-assessments is done in a couple of months for CSD, and those are the official numbers that they operate by. Right now, we're looking at sort of a preview, right? We've got a couple of months to resolve these challenges before CSD kind of locks in the scores, okay? So we would expect that things like 7.4 and 7.5 for the privates are probably going to take care of themselves as a regular course of business. If not, though, it is important that if there's not a plan to address those things, that it's at least taken care of to the degree that the standards require. All right. So in some cases, you may have reasons why boards may drag their feet on doing performance appraisals and that sort of thing. So it is important that they understand that there is a requirement out there that they do these tasks as required by the standards. Okay. I've got some tools that are going to help with that a little later in the presentation. Okay, so first up is to recruit and retain board members. We've got a few different ways that we can go about doing this. This is not an exhaustive list, and we can open up for some additional comments. And if you think of some things along the way, ways that your agency achieves this standard, please feel free to chime in the chat, and we'll call those out as we see them. So first thing is that when we think about recruiting and retaining board members, the idea behind community action boards is to have a maximum feasible opportunity for participation in the process. Okay, so we really have an opportunity here to engage the public like most other nonprofit boards do not. Okay, so we have this unique experience for our board members to come on and be the voice of their community, and that's designated by the rules of community action. When we're talking about the opportunity to serve on a board, um, it is also important to recognize that it is a rare opportunity. It's a little easy to lose sight of when we're working within the agency, to know how awesome a chance it is to serve on a community action board and to provide some direction to where services are targeted in our community. That those folks that are sitting on the board um, help the agency to understand where its resources are best placed in the community, and they get to contribute to that discussion and that planning process. It's good to look in the bylaws. So whenever there is a challenge to the number of people that are on the board, or if there are concerns about people leaving the board, when you want to retain board members, sometimes there are methods written into the bylaws that you may not realize are there. Often when we go looking into bylaws to assist agencies, we'll uncover things that are in there that may help that they didn't know were there, or some things that may get in the way um, that may just be left over from another time that those bylaws were necessary, and it may be time to update the rules so that that the bylaws reflect the reality of what the agency and the board are dealing with. Um, Particularly when we're looking at participation by the low income segment of the tripartite board, travel stipends and the next few items here are going to especially help there, but could help the entire board. But being able to offer travel stipends to folks, especially in large counties where there may be a long distance to drive, or if you're finding that after COVID flexibilities have subsided, that folks are having difficulty getting to meetings and that sort of thing. And that can affect your quorum. It can affect whether or not somebody's engaged with the board. Being able to offer travel stipend is something that needs to be calculated in the budget, but is something that's technically authorized by CSBG, right? So it's okay to do that by the rules of CSBG. It needs to be thought through at the beginning of the year. So that it's budgeted and accounted for as part of the agency's operations. Another thing that you could include besides travel stipends would be like having meals at board meetings, especially if you can have large meals at board meetings, or like buffet style where there's a lot of leftovers. That can be uh, an advantage for folks that like to take those home, or often having those meals served is a bonus, depending on your situation, depending on who's on your board. And if you're looking to attract people on the board that, um, like if you've got spaces in your low income portion and feedback is telling you that there are concerns about participating on the board, this may be one way to overcome some of those concerns. Um, for some, just finding folks to ask to be on the board can be a challenge, or finding qualified folks to be on the board can be a challenge. Um, Looking at Head Start boards can be really good for that. Head Start requires a policy council. And so whether or not your agency has Head Start, there is probably Head Start in your county. So if you are able to form good relationships with the Head Start um, leadership and the Head Start board, requesting that folks apply onto the CSBG or the Community Action Board, makes a lot of sense because those folks understand the work that's done on our boards, as being exposed to policy council. There's a little bit of training and some know-how that goes into that. So in other places, other boards have found some success in seeking out participation from Head Start policy councils or similar kinds of programs in the community. Okay. The next area of concern for a lot of agencies is in writing and updating a strategic plan. Now, there's a lot that goes around strategic planning. And what I'm going to go over are just the items that are required by the organizational standards. And a few of these are really prominent on the unmet standards reports that we look at. So considering where your agency is in its strategic plan right now, is it in the middle of the plan? Are you at the end of the plan? You're getting ready for a new one? Did you just start one? Those types of concerns are really important to be aware of so that you can address them accordingly. So the first standard is that the agency has an agency-wide strategic plan that's not just a program, but the whole agency has a strategic plan in place that's been approved by the governing board within the past 5 years. Words are really important in the organizational standards. So when it says approved by the governing board, they mean approved. So the governing board has to have an approval process for that plan, or that it's accepted versus accepted. You'll see that in the standards as well. So every 5 years, within 5 years. So a lot of times strategic plans can range from 3 to 5 years. I've seen that pretty commonly around. So if it's 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years, it's totally okay. So long as we're within the 5-year mark, that's what we're looking for. If not, then it's probably time to start looking at the strategic planning process at the agency, including the board. Second is that the approved strategic plan addresses reduction of poverty, revitalization of low-income communities, and empowerment of people with incomes to become more self-sufficient. Those come out of the goals of community action. Okay, so those should be referenced somewhere within the plan. Also within the plan are that the audiences of family, agency, and/or community goals are indicated. All three of those generally are referenced. All of them are absolutely referenced in the community action plan. That's part of something that gets submitted to CSD and is usually a subset or informs the strategic plan, right? So in some way, a good Roma strategic plan is going to at least address those three areas, if not have goals for all three of those areas. 4 is the customer satisfaction data and customer input are collected and they're part of the community assessment, and that's all included in the strategic planning process. So when we're coming up on this, all agencies are coming up on having to either recall a community assessment that's been done in the past year, or conduct one as part of the new community action planning process. As part of that community action planning process, you want to bake that into your strategic planning process at the same time. All right, so it's a really good idea, if you have not done so already, to consult your strategic plan as you get into this community action planning process. Then number 5, the governing board has received an update on progress meeting the goals of that strategic plan within the last 12 months. So if you're doing this every year, updating the plan, getting input on how the plan is going, you're almost guaranteed to have these other components because they're part of it, right? So it's really difficult to update a plan that doesn't exist. It's really tough to ensure that the board has approved things within 5 years if you're not doing an annual review. Or if you are doing an annual review. So it's a healthy process to look back on the strategic plan and see how things are going. That may also be, it doesn't have to be, but that may also be part of the executive director or the CEO's review process. Okay. So I'll pause here. We've gone over a couple of items. And I see some notifications here in the chat. All right. So does CalCappa have a template for a community action strategic plan or plan update? We do not. And I believe that a big part of that is that the strategic plan itself is going to vary for every agency. Now, there are good strategic planning tools, and there is a sort of it's not so much a template as it's like a toolkit that includes templates, multiple templates. So Helen, to answer your question about that, it is multi-pronged. So it's kind of a yes and no. The partnership has some of those templates. They are in their strategic planning section of the site, not so much the organizational standards, but they do have some tools there. And when it comes to strategic planning, we also have some additional tools. So, Helen, if you want, we can get together offline for more strategic planning specific kinds of tools, if that sounds good. And I'll try to remember to include a link in the resources from this call to everybody that's on there. Yeah, fantastic. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, strategic planning is huge. It's a great time of year right now to start thinking about that for existing plans. I've talked to some agencies that are gearing up for a whole new strategic plan. So that's interesting timing when you're starting cap planning and strategic planning at the same time. Kind of does double duty on all of that. Okay. The last area I really wanted to dig into with you all is the financial oversight area, and I just wanted to bring a few items to your attention because you may not realize that they're in the organizational standards. So the first couple of these have to do with the audit, and there are a couple of agencies that are not meeting this particular standard right now, so we wanted to bring it up so it's part of everyone's attention is ensuring that the organization's auditor is presenting an audit to the governing board, that the board formally receives and accepts that audit. Okay, so sometimes it's the formality of those things that haven't happened yet, right? Whether, if your agency does have an audit, then checking these boxes is important. And the tools that I have next are going to help with that. But it's important to be aware of that, right? So the audit is required for your agency. So having it and including this in the board is very important as well. The other couple of parts here, two pieces. One is that the fiscal policies have been reviewed by the staff and updated as necessary, that the board has eyes on that and approves those changes, right? So it's up to the staff to make the changes, to identify where things may or may not need change, and to update those policies. If there are no updates, that's okay too, but the board needs to at least sign off on that. Okay, so every 2 years it needs to be included. And then every 5 years, the board has to review at least a written procurement policy. So very important to take a look at your procurement policy, because especially within the past few years, there have been a lot of changes due to flexibilities that were allowed by COVID, and then a lot of those flexibilities have been rescinded. So it's important to pay attention to what's been updated in especially in dollar amounts and timeframes. Okay. So taking a look at procurement policies is good timing to do that right now. Okay, now for all of these items, for every single standard that you have in here. The partnership also has additional resources that are available to look at to help meet those standards. Two that I want to bring to your attention right now have to do with being able to record them and plan for meeting your standards, right? We really want to make sure that all of them are hit, not just these few that we're focusing on. So to help with that, these are two, and I'll drop the links here in the chat as well, but these are two resources that I can strongly recommend. And they're more or less templates that are available through the partnership. So you can use the QR codes there, or you can check out the links that are in the chat here. Okay. And these are two templatized calendars, right? So because the organizational standards happen on these cycles, you see every 2 years, every 5 years, every 3 years, because that's a predictable thing, there are some templates that are available to you, cheat sheets to get started and filling out a calendar of actions that you would want to ensure are included on your agendas. Okay. And when you are recording things in an agenda that are intended to meet organizational standards, the tip here is to copy and paste and use exact language. Okay, and by using the exact language, it makes it really easy for CSD to recognize those items in meeting minutes. And it makes it very quick for those that are reviewing these things to provide the assessment for the organizational standards, that they're tagged in there very, very quickly, easily accessible, right? So if you're looking at an agenda for a board meeting, and in that board meeting, you're expecting to accomplish particular organizational standards, you follow Robert's Rules of Orders to make motions and approve them, and then all of those approvals get recorded in the minutes. That action, and by having that there, that's what everybody's looking for to achieve the standard. So if you need to know, like, well, what is it? What do I do to achieve the standard? First, you do the work, that's required by the standard. But second is, and the most important part, in terms of getting credit for it, is recording that action happened. And you do that usually through the board meeting minutes, right? So take these cheat sheets, use them, pepper in all of the items into your meeting agendas that are required, and use exact language. I mean, this is the opposite of plagiarism, right? Or almost like encouraged. Like, we want you to quote them exactly. It helps meet the standard. What we find is that when we interpret the standard, sometimes we'll put approved where we mean accepted, or reviewed where we mean approved, or something like that. And just those little hangups on the terminology can be the thing that delays having org standards met or not met. Okay. I know it's simple and maybe silly, but it's a tip for getting past those things quickly. All right. So here's our final wrap up, and I'm going to invite everyone to have questions ready to go. If you would like additional support, additional information about some of the standards that you may be dealing with right now that may not have been part of the presentation, and we may want or may have additional resources available for you. So today, what we talked about was the unmet standards, the most of them, where we saw trends in California, how to fill board vacancies, updating the strategic plan, looking at your fiscal and procurement policies, and then tips for those board meeting minutes. So if you'd like to come off mute or post in the chat any questions that you have, I'd be happy to field those now.
Yeah, Lawrence, I have a quick question.
Sure.
So if an agency is looking for some help in drafting their strategic plan, how can CalCappa support them with that?
In drafting a strategic plan?
How would we go about that?
Well, CalCappa's support on drafting plans would be either in kind of a review process or potentially aligning an agency with a consultant. Um, we have, access to toolkits and resources for writing the plan. But in terms of review, um, uh, well, I mean, CalCappa is always available. If you've got a plan that you would like a draft review to see if it's meeting all of the requirements, that's pretty quick. And we can do that at CalCappa to ensure that the plan includes all of the components that we would expect to see in a plan. Um, and then critical review would involve a little bit more because we'd have to look into what the needs assessment looked like, and then how that aligns with um, the priorities of the board. So the board gets involved at that point, make sure that the agency priorities are aligned with the needs of the community and how they are helping to provide guardrails. So the board itself is kind of a review mechanism for strategic plans, but yeah, we can ensure, and a lot of times it's one thing to have a strategic plan. And Eric, I'm glad you're bringing this up. It's one thing to have a strategic plan for your organization. It's another to have a community action strategic plan. So there are a couple of items as outlined by the organizational standards that take what would be a typical kind of nonprofit organization strategic plan and add that extra layer of community action on it. Right? And we're happy to do that because we want to see everybody thrive in their agencies. So by all means, let us take a peek if you like. We love seeing the plans. Thank you for that.
Excellent. Thanks, Lawrence.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I've dropped a QR code up on the screen here. This is our internal survey. We collect feedback on everything. And we'd really appreciate if you've got any, couple words or um, at least give us a 0 to 10 rating, but we'll take any feedback that you've got for us for improving our content and getting things ready for next time. Okay, we've got a little time here. So what questions does anybody else have about your organizational standards, or are you finding that it's challenging to meet any of them due to particular reasons, or what can we bubble up? Oh, right. Risk assessment process. Yes, Helen, absolutely. And to make it more efficient, less time consuming, I'm not 100%. Helen, do you feel comfortable coming off mute?
Yes, yeah,
Oh, right. So tell me more.
yeah.
What are you experiencing?
So you know what, we use the God, it's a template or a process through NCAP, and I'm forgetting what it's called right now. But you can go on there. They have this, I mean, it's really comprehensive, which is lovely. But I'm just trying to think of, I mean, it takes a lot of time to go through that process, and smaller agency, less capacity, things like that. I mean, those things are obviously important, but I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way to do it, that's a little simpler, shorter kind of process. I'm gonna have to look back and see, but it's on the NCAP website, that link to that that comprehensive thing. And I know it's only every 2 years, and yet it's a heavy lift. I don't know if others have gone through this process, but it is a really heavy lift from my perspective. And I usually have to, I use that process, but then I have to summarize it in an accessible way for our board because it's way too much information. right? That's produced from that system. So kind of have to chunk it down into kind of like a matrix that breaks it up and stuff. So just trying to see if anyone, if you all have any tips or templates or strategies or anybody else does to make it a more manageable process.
Yeah, I know the one that you're talking about, Helen. And that's laid out by the Nonprofit Risk Management Center.
Right,
And
right.
yeah, and my understanding is they just updated their website. So I will take
Okay.
that back. I'm meeting with some of our friends at the National Partnership next week.
Uh-huh.
So I'll see if maybe there's some recommended tools for the making it a little less onerous. It sounds like the process that's in there may not be a one size fits all, or
Yeah.
or at least we're looking for ways of communicating our results with the board and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, how to streamline it a little bit and make it more easily accessible as a report out. I mean, one thing I will just say, when it's a year, it's a risk assessment year, right? When it's on that time frame, we do an annual audit. We do the org standards, cap plan, and then the risk assessment. So they're all really intense, right? Processes. And so that's what I'm just trying to figure out how to make that still impactful, still meaningful, but a lighter lift.
Gotcha. Like maybe somehow folding in the work to do one assessment into the processes
Yeah,
that you're
yeah,
already doing.
yeah, it just feels like, oh boy, here's another one, and we've covered some of this already through org standards, for example, or through our through the audit process. It'd be great to have some sort of like, what crosswalk, whatever, some kind of tool, right, that could kind of span some of these processes so that we can integrate them a little bit more, and just
Hmm.
make it more accessible and easier to do. Because, oh my God, I'm telling you, when it's a risk assessment year, I just go, oh my God, I'm pulling out my hair on it. So if there's some way we can, address it, I'm hoping I'm not the only one, who has those feelings, but, just thinking about how do we make it an easier and yet still meaningful, process.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Well, and while we've got a little bit of a brain trust on the call here, are there any thoughts from other agencies about how your agency approaches the risk management assessment?
Ellen, I will chime in real quick. This is of course something that, could use a little bit more specific. So like Lauren said, if you're open to it, we're more than happy to schedule a one-on-one conversation with you on this, go into greater detail, more specific to your agency. But my point is, with items like, especially the risk assessment, we find it's far easier if the agency can find ways to kind of incorporate some of the necessary work throughout like an annual cycle or throughout the cycle timeframe, so that some of those boxes are being checked off and that it becomes part of just the workflow of the agency. So that, as you mentioned, it's a bit of a heavy lift doing it all at once, right? During that risk assessment year, start pulling your hair out. And so if you can kind of break it down into more bite-sized action items throughout the year or throughout the cycle that all roll up and lead up into that, so that when it does come time to perform the actual risk assessment, you have a lot of the information already handy and it's all already part of your process. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think it's just, again, somewhat is capacity, right? I mean, when you have one of those, the years, even if you're doing it through the year, I don't know if anyone has done that. What's the nonprofit risk assessment? If anyone else has used that tool, and maybe there's a better tool or an easier tool. I mean, I've used that because it was sort of recommended through NCAP, and as and it is good. It's just, yeah. I mean, sometimes you can fit it in through the year, and sometimes you can't. So just try to kind of think about, and we're doing that more and more with org standards too, right? And trying to incorporate it more fully throughout the year. But yeah, here we go. Yeah, thanks for that, Lawrence.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is a cool thing, and it used to be free. I hope it's still free, but
That's my understanding.
oh,
Yeah.
good. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so not to, if other folks have other things they want to bring up, I just find that this is one of those ones that is it's a heavier lift for us. And I totally hear you about incorporating it throughout the year. Oh, Melda says we've used that tool. Yeah, it's lengthy. Uh-huh. Well, and yeah, that's interesting. And I'd love, I mean, this is kind of could be a topic for something, maybe more in depth, just to see too, again, especially for maybe smaller agencies in particular, like who is the risk assessment team? How does that really work for
Mhm.
folks? Yeah, I'd love to dive a little deeper into it, as we go forward. Mhm.
Helen, this sounds like a really good topic for our planning affinity group to tackle. Because it's kind of right in there with just like you were saying, all of those other planning activities that seem to stack all at the
Right.
same time.
Right,
It's up to us
right.
planners, right? So yeah, let's I'm taking that down as a recommendation for that group to look into further.
That'd be great. Thanks all.
Mhm. Mhm. All right. And April, you sent me a message. You want to come off chat, kind of describe a little how your planning team divides things up?
Sure. Hi.
Hey.
So we have, and it's actually, we're, kind of restructuring as every year we kind of change it a little bit. But what we do is we kind of break up the standards as they're due. And our planning team also assists with the strategic plan and everything. So they kind of do all of those items. So that's why it kind of makes sense for them to help with this portion of it. But what they'll do is I have a board portal. So we do everything electronically now. And I gave them access so they can access what they need throughout the year if they need it. Or otherwise I have a shared drive where they can access items. So they can turn in as needed. And then we all coordinate with our CSD rep on an email as things are needed. So we kind of work together as a group internally, but we're still, like I said before, it's still a work in progress.
Gotcha. So it's a divide and conquer, but you're all operating on the
Exactly.
same stuff. Okay.
Yeah, but usually the planning department, because they're really strong, they
Yeah.
lead that.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're familiar, right? Like they know,
Exactly.
yeah, where the resources are. Okay. Thanks, April. That's helpful. Right. Cool. Any other org standards items that have been pestering your agency that you like some tips on? Okay. Well, hearing none, I think I can give you a little bit of time back in your hour. I appreciate everybody coming in and joining us today for the call. And keep an eye out for Cal Kappa's next events. We've got tons of stuff. The year's not over. It's not just our conference that's coming up. We've got all kinds of goodies online. And all of our affinity groups are meeting and doing their planning activities for next year. So stay engaged with Cal Kappa. We'll see whoever's going to the conference. We'll see you at the conference. And then know that the next big event after Cal Kappa's conference is our advocacy day, is April 3rd. So save the date. I don't have links just yet, but save the date. April 3rd in Sacramento is going to be a blast. If you're into advocacy, let your agencies know. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. And thank you for your feedback on the call too. Click that link. Appreciate you all. We'll see you at the next one.
Bye, everyone.